or something. So I wanted to get started here and chat a little about the Facebook API breach. We've actually gotten a lot of calls about this and a lot of confusion about what it is, what it isn't, yeah. So I wanted to kind of walk through for folks that are tracking this and maybe some folks that aren't, what specifically we know, what we don't. If you're being asked by your management, does this impact you? Hopefully we can clear that up too. The answer is maybe. Whether or not you use Facebook authentication for anything, as we'll discuss in a little bit, that actually may not matter. Right. So let's talk about how the bug actually came in, and a lot of people are still confused about this. We find, which is kind of why we're doing this. Facebook allows users and developers to see what a profile page looks like from another user's perspective. Right. So basically, this is generally meant for web developers, et cetera. Basically, if you've got somebody's basically account, and you're able to go look at how their account actually works, or how basically how a particular feature looks in their account, that can help you understand how to best deliver your message, right? Because of course, your settings and your skin and whatever else that you have assigned to your profile absolutely can impact layout and all that good stuff, right? And so we actually see this in a large number of web apps. Facebook is not the only one. In fact, Wired ran an article late last week, or maybe Monday, I can't remember, but basically talking about other applications that have View As enabled. Now, View As by itself is not necessarily a vulnerability. In this particular case, it led to one because the developers that were working on different pieces of the code, right? You have the folks doing View As, likely are not the same people that are doing other widgets. Facebook is a huge application, and ultimately, it's very likely that the folks that built the View As piece didn't build in some of the other widgets that actually ended up causing the problem, right? So as we talk about this, the View As, one of the principles that we have to deal with here, of course, is it has to remain view only. Right? Now, there was one feature that allows users to wish each other a happy birthday. And it turns out that the folks that wrote the video, happy birthday widget, specifically that allowed them to upload videos, among other things, so the video widget becomes important here in a minute. Basically, when you did a View As, you were actually able to post as another user. Now, you couldn't just blindly post as them. I suspect Facebook would have found this very, very quickly. But as it turns out here, they had screwed up the happy birthday piece. So if you want to wish somebody a happy birthday as basically as that other person, then you can do that from View As. All right. So this is a problematic, or definitely problematic, and allow them to post it at the end. Right, now this video piece becomes a little bit important here because anytime you perform any action on really any site, but certainly Facebook is no exception there, Facebook has to go check your access token and see, does that access token allow you to do that thing that you're trying to do? Now, we in security know all about the principle of least privilege. Right? We should absolutely not allow basically an access token to have maximum permissions for the user if all it needs to do is be able to post to the wall. Right? Now, it turns out that likely to minimize bandwidth over cell networks, the mobile app key or access token that is supplied to the mobile application basically allows you to do anything, right? It's full privileges, and I guess everything is probably a little bit overboard, but there's very little you can't do in the app given that access token. Now, there's no reason that this video uploader, when it's basically supplying an access token, when you take and upload a video and you get a token back, there's no reason it should have the privileges to do everything in the mobile application, right? So here's your second paper cut, if you will. Because when you do a View As and you go to wish somebody a happy birthday and upload a video, you get a token with full privileges. And then the third part was, and this is really the big piece, because the other two were relatively insignificant without this. This is the video uploader returns the wrong token, right? So while we're operating in View As mode, this video uploader, again, that we can get to View As and then wishing somebody a happy birthday and uploading the video, that returns the access token of the user you're impersonating. Now, this video uploader widget is used for a whole lot more. It's used for video uploading across the site, not just in the happy birthday wishes, right? So this actually kind of comes into, you've got one developer in one spot who says, oh, I see when you request this, I should go ahead and make sure and echo back an access token. And turns out here that access token was way overprivileged. And there was never a thought from threat model standpoint of when you do view as, or could this feature ever even be accessed via view as, right? Realistically, it shouldn't have been able to. The only thing that allowed that was the second bug that allowed you to post as the user, right? With basically post a happy birthday message as the user, and then it turns out a video message is one of those possibilities, right? So you combine all these bugs together, and you now from any friend. Now that again, this is pretty key here. It has to be somebody who's one of your friends, right? But from any friend, you're able to come back in then and post as that particular, basically as that particular user. Right? So basically, we look at this as death by 1,000, or if you really want to come down to number of paper cuts here, we'll go with death by 3 paper cuts. Each of these bugs could have been significant on its own, but combined together, they offer the ability to compromise anybody in your friends list. And then once you have the sole access tokens, the attackers pivot to their friends and repeat recursively. And that's how you end up with 50 million of these things that basically Facebook believes were compromised. And then the second number you hear, the 90 million, is the number of people that have used the view as, or number of accounts that view as has been used against. And so that's why you have the delta in the numbers there. The initial number is 50 million. That's the number they believe to have been compromised. 90 million is the number that they, basically the number that they know somebody has used view as, basically against that account. All right. Again, if we take a look at multiple bugs together, is this brand new? Is this like APT, super APT, cyber badness, right? No, it turns out that using multiple less consequential bugs together is not new. We call this exploit chaining and vulnerability research. And we look at, in many cases, or most cases actually, we're using some type of information disclosure vulnerability in combination with some other flaw to achieve a goal. Right. Turns out that that access token that basically was being echoed back in the HTML with the video uploader, you could consider that an information disclosure, and then maybe the use of it being an auth bypass. Although these particular bugs aren't very clean, except for the that access token was too privileged, right? So we would call that basically a overprivileged asset. Right? So I want to talk about third-party sites, because this is probably one of the more important pieces to discuss. Third-party sites and applications use Facebook's authentication services, and they do this because it's easier than building their own proprietary systems, and they also get a lot of data analytics built out, or basically from the ground up. And the problem is that once an attacker compromises the access token for a user account, the attacker can impersonate the user on any site or application where the user is authorized Facebook to log in. Now, when I first heard about this, I kind of thought about how many places have I authorized Facebook to basically Facebook to use, and my number was 0. And so I kind of was smug for a minute and thought, yeah, I'm good to go. But it turns out, as we'll discuss in a little bit, you may not be good to go based on some academic research, right, that was published at the Unix conference earlier this year. One of the things we've been getting a lot of questions about is, can attackers get my password? And the short answer is no. The long answer is maybe. It kind of depends. So when I say maybe it depends, I don't think they can get your Facebook password. There's certainly no evidence of that. But Facebook has good security architecture. Facebook's long contended it doesn't store plain text passwords in the systems. And I know there's people laughing when I say Facebook has good security architecture, but they do. I know this is an example of a software that failed. But realistically, again, if they had plain text passwords, if they had the ability to go reset your password from the access token, I mean, these are things that threaten all that, right? These vulnerabilities would be much more serious if Facebook hadn't already performed threat modeling and understood the overall nature of the threat. Let me see if I can drop the. Let's see. Hey, Dell mentioned there's echo back again. Dell, you're hearing it now? I'm trying to make sure that I don't have the echo here. This webcast platform's a little wonky, whatever the word is for that. Yeah, okay, well, there we go. I guess I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe the webcast platform, I'll see on the recording how bad it is, and maybe we'll re-record not live. In any case, kind of coming back through, and talk about can attackers get password here. My bigger concern is my third-party sites. My third-party sites and applications that integrate with Facebook for authentication, they may not have the same security models, and in fact, very frequently do not have the same security models. Many of them have really, really poor security architecture. Very poor security architecture. Many of them have limited permission boundaries, and we have a number of bugs that may allow attackers to steal much more sensitive information from these third-party sites using access tokens that get stolen from Facebook. Now, one of the problems that I run into is the total exposure of this vulnerability is what we call known unknown, right? And I want to highlight here that I don't think we're ever going to know the full potential damage caused by these 50 million stolen access tokens. The feature that was being compromised got brought in to Facebook in 2017. Was it June or July, mid 2017? Here we are starting on quarter 4 of 2018, and wow. Yeah, I guess, Brian, I hear the echo, or I hear what you're saying. Unfortunately, I think it's the webcast platform. My apologies there. I'll make a recording offline if this is, if the recording is bad. I think the webcast platform is just getting jittery. So again, to talk about this, I just mentioned here we're unlikely to ever know the full potential damage caused by these accounts. Yeah, webcast. Yeah, so, well, the 40 plus million, I'm getting a question here from Vance. He asked the 40 plus million, what about those on top of the 50 million? The 40 plus million are accounts that Facebook themselves don't believe that you stole, or don't believe that we're stolen, but they did have the view as feature used, right? So Facebook is using some as yet unknown triage tool, basically to understand which accounts were compromised versus which accounts were compromised versus which accounts simply had the view as feature used. Just because somebody had view as used against their account doesn't mean that their API token got stolen or access token got stolen, and they haven't really explained yet why or what criteria they're using to understand the 50 million versus the other 40 million on top of that. When I say we're unlikely to know the full exposure of this, a lot of this is going to come down to Facebook's logging, but understand, of course, that some of that logging is stuff that we're relying on third parties for. And when I get into these third-party sites that are using Facebook as their authentication or identity management provider, that's where I start getting into we're never going to know the impact of this. That's kind of where I'm at there. And so I have to kind of come back and ask, how is Facebook investigating this? And it turns out these, we come back to the whole errant features here, the broken features have been introduced in July 2017. And depending on the amount of logging data available, there may be no way to track this issue back to its source. Facebook hasn't disclosed the quantity, the types of logs that they have available. Right, that's something that I'll talk about here in a minute. But that's a known unknown for us, in public space. Whether or not Facebook is ever going to talk about that is yet to be known. Again, they certainly have the option. By the way, their transparency on this has been phenomenal. But as we move forward, it'll be interesting to know, or interesting to see what other data they produce, right? It's also important to know that multiple attackers may have independently discovered the same bug. The 50 million accounts may not be the work of a single attacker. It's unknown from like a throttling standpoint. Like, again, did Facebook discover this because attacker number 2 came in and was super aggressive with the view as, or was it something a little bit more benign? But regardless here, again, remember that it may not just be one attacker. Multiple attackers could have those 50 million accounts, or it could be that multiple different attackers have subsets with possibly some overlap in those 50 million. When we start talking API logging, right? If Facebook has the appropriate logging, they can track where a user's access token was used from and when. This is kind of where, if I'm doing this instant response without knowing the logging I have available, this is kind of my tabletop scenario here. So I'm going to kind of pop in and take a look at IP anomalies, right? So where did we see a user access token being requested as under the view as? Where do we see view as being used way outside of the norm for that user? And then again, when they use that access token, where are those IP addresses outside of the norm? Now, one of the problems that I'm going to run into here potentially is, basically, how do these third-party sites log? And again, where are those third-party logs? How much do we have available? All that stuff, right? Now, there was some really interesting research. I mentioned this earlier. Presented at the USEX conference earlier this year. And what was really interesting here is that these researchers did a bunch of experiments using stolen access tokens. They had actually modeled this scenario out. Ironically, appears during the time that the actual vulnerability was in place. Right? Now, they just looked at what happened if an attacker stole a cookie. They noted that some applications, some of those access tokens were passed in the clear over Wi-Fi, which is just mind-blowing. But hey, coming back on this, if an attacker uses a stolen, receives a stolen access token, and they use it specifically to discover against Facebook that the session does not show up in the session list. If you've ever been inside of Facebook, you can see your active sessions. The session does not show up in the session list if the duration was less than 1 hour. Now, this is significant because I cannot imagine what the design decision was here that made this the case. I'm sure that there is a design justification for it. I just don't know what it is. But obviously here, this now leads to the question of, if it doesn't appear in that list, where does it appear in the logs, right? Or does it appear in the logs? Just when Facebook comes out later, if they do, and say, here's how much logging data we have available, are we going to know then basically, are we going to be able then to determine what logs do they actually have? Are they the raw logs that show the access token use, or are they the aggregate logs, right? Where show this is when a session began, this is when it ended, because here it appears that these sessions don't appear on the session list unless the user is active in a session for longer than 1 hour, right? I made a joke about this on Twitter the other day, and I said they were applying the RC 5959, right? So 59 minutes, 59 seconds, where the sessions don't count unless they have reached at least an hour. Look, that's funny to joke about, but the reality is that's kind of scary, right? We're dealing now with with logging that may not necessarily be correct. And in digital forensics, this is something that you have to always take into account. We do a lot of digital forensics with on some interesting custom-ish systems, where we going in don't necessarily, have a good forensics guide for how to do forensics on this platform. And one of the things that we're always super careful to tell people is that, as we go in and we often build test systems and look at logs, just when we see one action, right, that generates a log entry, we say, okay, cool, this log entry can be generated by this thing. And the fact that a log entry is there suggests that this action happened, but it's not necessarily conclusively indicative that this particular action occurred, right? And there's a big difference. There's a world difference, and a lot of people don't understand those. As we get into that analysis, right? So I want to note here that trust your log, sure, but understand the limitations of the logging. And again, these researchers doing these experiments, right, were able to discover this. And look, I have to say that this is pretty concerning to me, from hearing the response and the lack of some of the responses from Facebook. This is probably the biggest concern that I now have is, do they really have the logging to be able to say what they're saying, right? Again, we have experimental data here from a group of academic researchers that says that a session is not logged, at least not visible from their perspective, unless that session lasts longer than an hour. Well, look, if you have an attacker who's programmatically who got to 50 million accounts, they're certainly not hand jamming this, right? They're programmatically targeting this. So if that's the case, how much programmatic targeting have they done? And did that programmatic targeting last longer than an hour for an account? Absolutely not. I think we know that. And so since it would have lasted less than an hour as they steal that data, would that ever even show up as a session? And I think that's really my big concern at the moment. Now, I want to note that all of these in this list here are not specifically data that could come from a specific Facebook token, right? But they could come with, basically with other access tokens. And the idea was they were testing these. Now, many of these are Facebook, but I want to make sure it's clear that not all of these necessarily will be Facebook. These are just apps that allow you to log in with an identity provider, of which Facebook is one. Now, I think it's important to note here that with that access token, you're able to look up a lot of really interesting stuff, right? I mean, I'm not a Tinder user, but if I was, I might be concerned that somebody could see all my Tinder messages, right? Now, you'll notice here that in most cases, and they've got little asterisks there beside the password. ASOS, I don't think I've ever used that before, but again, kind of the idea here, as I'm flipping through this is pretty interesting here, right? If I need, Airbnb, for instance, right? I'm thinking like super stalker kind of stuff. This is reasonably concerning to me, right? So again, as you look at this, understand that these are third parties who may not have a login that Facebook has. Booking.com, Airbnb, Expedia. The passport number thing is certainly interesting. The payments information is interesting. On Expedia, I'm an Expedia user as well. And as you look at more and more of this, it's kind of like, well, this doesn't look good, right? We come down a little bit further here, and we're down into some stuff that I probably care a little bit less about. But Mediafire, man, anybody use this? All right, I do actually, believe it or not. It's actually a pretty convenient platform for file sharing. Has a nicer web interface than Dropbox used to have, and so I've still got a bunch of stuff up in Mediafire, and it works well here. And you've got access to photos and videos stored in Mediafire, right? Now, this sounds a lot like kind of like the iCloud attacks, and if you're looking at what do people sync to Mediafire, the answer is probably a lot of stuff they shouldn't, right? So interesting there. And it looks like you could take over full account there on Pinterest, meaning that you create a new password from the access token. That was really interesting there. It doesn't send a notification back to the user. I highly recommend you take a look at this this paper, or just use a couple of slides here. We'll post these right after the webcast. But as you take a look here, this kind of paints the picture. By the way, these are not the only services that use Facebook. Or allow Facebook login. And one of the things that the researchers noticed is in some cases they can access accounts depending on how the developers built the app. You can access an account you didn't link to Facebook. That's kind of interesting by using stolen access token. And probably the more interesting one is that many of the accounts or many of the platforms, third-party platforms, don't actually check to see if the access token is valid at the time they authenticate the user. This is also very interesting because if that's happening, we're dealing with basically a token where Facebook has said they've gone in and validated 50 million tokens. Well, okay, cool. But if the app doesn't actually check for token validity, doesn't matter at that point, right? If they don't revalidate the token as they don't revalidate that token as allow the access, then Facebook's actions don't really matter. Now, if you read Facebook's own posts on this in their newsroom, it is clear that they understand this is a problem because, as they talk about the fact that they've reset these, they talk about the requirements for app developers to do their thing, for third-party app developers to do their thing. So Facebook clearly knows this is an issue. It's kind of interesting that, I'm positive they knew this was an issue before too. So it's really interesting to me to see that they're kind of pushing on this now, in its response mode versus before. And by the way, I'm not going to get into the whole Facebook is evil, blah 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 kind of stuff. But I will mention here that it is kind of interesting. At least from where I stand, it's kind of interesting that the Facebook, again, let's assume that they knew that app developers were not doing a good job with managing managing these tokens before the breach, it was in Facebook's best interest to do nothing. All right. Now, it wasn't breaching their platform, and they continue to get a lot of valuable data. Right. Facebook provides a single sign-on service, not for your convenience, but because it's it's convenient for them. It's convenient for them to gather more data, target better advertisements. And again, this isn't me saying Facebook is evil, but let's be honest about motivations here. Right. They had no motivation to move before that breach. Now that their platform has caused a problem, and now that risk is transferring down to these third parties. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and kick over the supply chain risk note here. Right. Again, this is a huge supply chain risk, and it's a risk that I think a lot of people knew about, but is now being realized in a very tangible manner. And so I want to talk quickly about what Facebook hasn't said, because they've said a lot of stuff, but they really haven't said a lot of things as well. My big three questions here kind of come down to how far back do their logs for access token use go, and if you want to jam in there with number one, what logging do they really have? Right? They know at this point. I'm certain Facebook is aware about the 1 hour bug as reported by the researchers. These researchers that posted Usenix or presented Usenix. Does Facebook, when they say they haven't seen any evidence of this, what do they really, any evidence of account misuse? What do they really mean there? Are they tracking sessions that only get tracked an hour later? Well, that doesn't really mean anything to me, because I know that's not how most attackers would have used those access tokens. They're not going to be using them for an hour. They're basically going to connect, programmatically snarf some data up, and then basically the session's done. And that's not going to exceed an hour. I'd be surprised if it exceeded a minute. So that's kind of question one. Question two is, which third-party apps do and don't regularly check for token validity? Now, this one's a little bit harder for Facebook to check, but you can get a pretty good idea here pretty quickly as they go and make a request for an OAuth token. And basically, when that third-party app makes that request and Facebook says, or to validate that token, and Facebook says, nope, not valid, then if they don't make another request to follow up, right, one of two things happen. Either, well, a couple of things happen, right? Maybe the user was like, can't remember my password, and went somewhere else, right? And closed the site. Or the app actually allowed the user to continue. Now look, 100% of users that get you have to revalidate with Facebook message, right? Where you click the little, do you wish to allow the site to, basically, or link the site to Facebook button. When you get that, excuse me, some percentage of users may go away from the site, but 100% of them don't, right? So, I think Facebook with their logs, again, depending on the type of logs they have, I think that they can, and look, if they couldn't before, they can now, because they just invalidated 50 million tokens. Whatever logging they had before they knew about the breach definitely is different today. I hope is different today, and are able to validate this. And I think that this is something that, I think Facebook owes the community at this point, is, a list of third-party apps that don't regularly check for token validity. Because if you know that you link your Facebook account to one of those particular applications, and, Facebook obviously knows this as well, I think that there's some duty to notify there, right? Duty to notify these users that even, basically if the attacker ever had access to their token, this app is not validating it based on the logged-out nature. And so my follow-up here, my number three, is what does evidence of misuse of those access tokens look like? Because for somebody to come back and say there's no evidence of something, first off, we all know in DFIR, in the digital forensics world, no evidence of something doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means there's no evidence. And so my kind of follow-up here is what does that look like? What are you checking for specifically? And again, a lot of this really comes down to what logs do you have and how are you performing the investigation. But I'm always suspicious when any party comes out and says, hey, there's no evidence of blah, because I'm always suspicious that they just either don't have the evidence or are looking for it in one particular way that yields the no evidence of finding, right? Whereas, in fact, if they took a different look at it, they would actually find evidence. And I want to note these aren't just academic questions, right? People will update their threat models accordingly. Maybe an ethical question for Facebook is, given that they have the ability to understand which third-party apps don't regularly check for token validity, given that they have that ability to do this, does Facebook have a duty at this point to effectively to turn that or to disable that use, right? Should they then be basically preventing anybody from, preventing a third party from using their login services, right? Now, look, on the commercial side, that's not a smart move for Facebook because, again, remember, they provide this service because it gives them data. They use that data to sell you advertisements. And again, they have a perverse incentive, regardless of your security, to continue allowing that activity to happen. On the flip side, and if you Google's or go with Google's first do no harm, or the good old Hippocratic oath there, don't be evil. Then I think you kind of have to step back and say, look, we provide this thing. We believed that it worked a particular way. We found out it didn't due to our own errors, and users, 50 million of them potentially, have been placed at risk. So as I kind of model back through this, I'll mention here again, they really aren't just academic questions, right? I've chatted with my family about what they should be doing, and again, from where I sit, it's if you've got stuff linked to Facebook, you should be going in and manually logging out of that. I think you should also consider, again, what does that look like, and what would an account compromise look like there specifically? What could an attacker get? The answer to that, by the way, is literally anything you can see when you're logged into the app, right? And then finally, if you're so inclined, if there's particularly sensitive data, I'd be asking my third parties, if I'm logged in with Facebook anyplace, I would absolutely ask a third party, what do you believe your exposure to be? Do you have any indication of, or what have you done to determine whether or not attackers have used these stolen access tokens, right? So I would be looking at all of this and now again, I don't have anything linked through Facebook, but as soon as this news of this came out, I went in and manually logged myself out anyway. I was not one of the users that got notified about the view as. So my guess is that the people that I've friended on Facebook generally didn't get hit by this either. Don't know, but it would seem to imply at least that the attackers didn't get all the way to my account. Facebook didn't notify me. That said, I still went ahead and invalidated tokens to check my anything that had been linked. And surprisingly, I saw a couple apps that I do not remember linking to Facebook that I went ahead and unchecked the box there and made sure and forced to invalidate a token. Now, for whatever that's worth, right now, these are things like Hootsuite, for instance. I do actually remember, adding that. Hootsuite no longer actually can post to Facebook anyway, so there was no reason for that to be linked. So I think this is a great spot for me to kind of cut off here and ask if anyone has any questions. I apologize for the echo. I'll troubleshoot this on the back end with the webcast platform provider. I have kind of an idea of what's going on, but I want to verify with them before I go off the rails. Any questions before I go ahead and cut this off? And like I said, I'll post slides on our Rendition site probably in the next hour or so if you want the slides for reference. Yeah, so one of the questions is, would changing your credentials invalidate the tokens? The short answer on this is I don't know in the case of Facebook. If you change your Facebook credentials, whether or not that actually changes your basically invalidates a particular access token, I don't know. I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no. Typically, with most websites, that's the case. So even changing your password doesn't necessarily invalidate the access tokens that are already assigned out that basically are allowing communications between those sites. I've got another one here that asks, is my Instagram login compromised as well? They don't. These researchers that kind of kick this around don't have Instagram in the in the list here of stuff that they tested. So my gut says. My gut says no, your login isn't compromised. But again, if attackers if you have your Instagram account linked to your Facebook account, and attackers got a hold of your notified that they had control of your Facebook token, access token, then again, it's conceivable that they could have accessed data in Instagram. Although I have to mention that of all the places that attackers are likely to go, I wouldn't expect Instagram to be a high volume kind of hit, right? I don't think there's a lot of value from their perspective. I don't think there's as much value taking that data. I mean, it's super creepy if somebody's got, if I've got private Instagram photos, but I'm trying to put my black hat on here. and think like an attacker. And look, from a blackmail standpoint, Tinder, oh my gosh, hookup. I'm not entirely certain what hookup is, but if I had to guess, well, anyway. So Airbnb, right? If you're doing stalkerish, right? Yeah, totally. There's, in fact, the link is up here. Basically, I just grabbed a couple of screenshots from that Usenix paper there. Like I said, I'm going to post the slides here, so you can literally just click it. Or I tweeted it out the other day. I'll go to try and tweet it again here after the webcast. But again, it's important to know that this is just a tiny subset of the apps that they tested. They actually tested a lot of different apps and looked at the different apps that were available to log in from the Facebook API, and the numbers are just astounding. So it's one of these. It's a very interesting. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of supply chain security research recently, in fact, we just released a supply chain threat hunting model, and risk evaluation of threat hunting model. And I got to tell you, like, this is. I'm sad that this happened. I wish that it had happened before I gave that presentation at the Threat Hunting Summit, because wow, wouldn't this have been an awesome use case for supply chain analysis, right? Now, look, big companies like Facebook, I don't typically worry as much about from a supply chain standpoint. The more people use the feature, the more likely it is to go find badness in a feature, in a feature or in an app and whatever. Some kind of herd immunity, I guess, might be the way to think of it. But man, this one's a big deal, right? When it comes down to it, because there's a lot of people impacted by this, and when I say we're not going to know unlikely to know the full potential damage, I really believe. Again, remember that this feature has been in play for a year, right? More than a year, and a lot of my third-party sites just. Look, I know the people we pen test and the incident responses that we do, and obviously, security is a spectrum. And some people are way down that spectrum, and I have to assume that a lot of folks are just not logging, right? They haven't bitten that security bullet yet, as a result, I think there's a lot of folks that are not ever going to know what data was taken if data. I shouldn't say what data was taken, but if data was taken and what specifically was from a given account. Right? So yeah. Any other questions before I break this off? Okay, well, hey, hopefully this has been useful. Again, apologize for the echo. I'll get that troubleshot out. But I'll post these slides here in the next hour or so up on the rendition site. Just watch your Twitter feed, and they'll be out. Usually they send a link to the webcast anyway afterwards to anybody that registered, and we'll post the recording up on YouTube and all that good stuff. So anyway, appreciate everybody coming out. And like I said, the goal here was just to help people clear up some misconceptions, understand the actual problem versus the media hype, which, again, I know most of the media is writing for my parents and not for us as InfoSec professionals, but I think it's important to get out there and kind of chat about what it really is and how do we need to reevaluate our threat models. Look, if nothing else, I would take away